Hi guys, trans rights and the challenges facing trans people has taken centre stage recently with the back and forth between the Scottish and UK parliaments. Some link the issue to the fall of Nicola Sturgeon, but there is a fear that in the trans community that both politicians and the media are trying to weaponise the rights of these people to their own ends. I had the pleasure to speak to Tilly, a trans woman from Denmark who's currently living in the United Kingdom. We spoke about her transition, the problems trans people face, and what politicians and the media should be doing. Hi everyone, and I have a very special guest, interesting guest today. I hope you're going to find what Tilly has to say very interesting too. Tilly, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm a 23-year-old trans woman who have lived in the UK for the past 4 years. I was born and raised in Denmark until the age of around 19, and then I moved to the UK. In terms of my family history and when I came out at about the age of 15 and 16 to my friend circle and my family as well. So I came out first to my close friends in school, and then I later down the line came out to my mom and then to my sister and to my dad. And majority of them took it well, but my dad took a bit longer to adjust. But after a while, he adjusted and he's now perfectly on board with it, all in, no problem at all.
And you were in Denmark. You were in Denmark at the time, yeah. Yes.
And I have a quite supportive family, so for me, I'm quite fortunate in that end that my family is perfectly fine with everything. It took them some time, but that's the thing when you come out. Sometimes some family members takes quite a while to get on board with it, and other people will get on board with it immediately, depending on where you live and what traditions and how your family was raised.
Is your family living in a city or in the countryside in Denmark?
Greater Copenhagen, so it's not the countryside, it's not the city. I mean, a lot of people in Denmark aren't really that different when you come to the countryside or when you come out different. What I've experienced is a bit of a mixture. There's some people who has problems when they live in the city and some that doesn't when they live on the countryside. So it really depends, I think, on the person. So I don't think that makes a huge difference, at least not in Denmark.
What about your extended family? So when you came out to your family, your immediate family, they were very supportive, or your father was a little bit, maybe took a little bit more time. What about your extended family and your friends? Or did people have a feeling that, you know, it wasn't a complete shock to them, or how did they react?
Well, the initial reaction was sort of like they could see I was happier and feeling better after I came out, but for some people it came as a shock, some it didn't. But I also got autism, so I think I was always a little bit different when growing up. So for them, it wasn't necessarily that easy. I think it's a different story for some of them to actually understand and like think about it. I was more to myself, and I think partially because I was autistic when I was in my earlier teen years, partially because I was a bit uncomfortable with my body, and I think that kind of led me to be more introverted when I first started growing up. But then when I was about age of 14, 15, 16, I began socializing more, began finding my friends circle in central Copenhagen and other areas, and started socializing a lot and becoming part of the queer community back in Denmark. And also because I live quite close to the train to Sweden, I also have some queer friends over in Malmö in Sweden.
So can you tell us a bit about the community? So in Denmark, so is it a large community, a small community, and it provides support for individuals? Yes.
The queer community, and not just trans people, the queer community in general, is quite a large community in Denmark. I mean, Copenhagen is seen as a quite liberal place, and I think to good extent that's true. I mean, we have, for example, LGBT Denmark, as it was called back then. I think it may be called LGBT Plus now. Was having headquarters in central Copenhagen, and people would meet up there both for the youth groups and for the trans groups and so on. So there would be a lot of socialization. People would come from all different groups. We would go sometimes and go to social media with the trans group, and I would come in about 5-6 o'clock, and then sometimes we would finish at 2 a.m. And I was around the age of 16, just chatting and talking for that long with a group of between, I don't know, sometimes only 5, sometimes 40 people. So it really varied a lot. And I think the group has gotten significantly bigger and more well-known now. I would say in the earlier phase of it, when it started becoming, I think 2015 was the time where trans people began getting a lot more media attention, and at that point in time was when I started coming out and socializing in that area. So it became, I think, people started to know what it was to be trans more and started coming out more. There was more awareness brought into it. So
I'm just thinking also that, you know, you're a young person, so, you know, with the internet, has it made it easier to build a community compared to maybe people maybe 20 years ago who had come out as trans? It was definitely more. I don't know. Have you spoken to older trans people about their experience before the internet or before, you know, a better understanding? Yes.
There's definitely a big difference when you look at it from that perspective, because back then, a lot of them would be either hiding or not being out, or would be afraid of being bullied or something like that. I think the internet also brought a lot more awareness, and to an extent that has helped a lot. But to another extent, now you see the right-wing media, unfortunately, coming in and attacking trans people, especially in the UK. I think that's quite an important thing to note. In Denmark, the right-wing media wasn't as severe as it is in the UK, especially not as compared to right now. So what you will see is that, to an extent, it's brought more awareness, but I also think it's brought more culture wars. And I think in the UK it is worse. And I partially would blame that because of the Conservative government running out of ideas and running out of leverage, and they have nothing to deliver on. So when you have nothing to deliver on, what way can you win an election? You try to start culture wars against immigrants, trans people, and other groups in society. But in Denmark, it's proportional representation. It's a party-less proportional representation. So when you look at the parties there, it makes a huge difference, because culture wars doesn't have as a significant impact, in my opinion, when you think about it from that perspective. That in the UK, it's only one party on the right and one party on the left that has the option to win power. But in Denmark, even though there's only one large party normally, although right now there's actually also a complete centrist party now, and a left and a right party. But before then, there was only the left and the right. But there's smaller parties, and they rely on votes from each other. So you have more scrutiny, because if a smaller party disagrees with something, then you may not be in government anymore, or you may just not vote it through. So obviously, also that kind of makes it more difficult for people to just win power on culture wars, because how are you going to be able to win power if you have to sell culture war and it's 5-6 parties that has to do it instead of just one? So if one party has run out of ideas, what probably will happen is that another party will take over instead. It's like the Conservatives.
And the Conservatives seem to be adopting a lot of these far right policies, like from the Brexit Party or from Reform UK, in order to avoid them taking votes away from them. Just on the issue of politics, I'd like to get your reaction to what's happened in Scotland recently. So the Scottish government were pushing a bill to. Are you familiar with the bill? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the bill or what you know about it.
So it basically allows a trans person to go through and change the gender legally through a self-reflection period, I think, of 3 months, from what I remember, or 6 months if you're under age of 18 and over 16 or 16. And in that case, you will be able to then get married as a female or as male, or in the other case, you can also just be allowed to die in that gender. That's predominantly the two things that it would have for you, because under the UK regulation, if you have changed gender, if you want to change gender and you are married, it's more difficult. Can't remember the specifics to that law right now, but that is obviously way more problematic. So this would allow people, for example, that maybe have plans of getting married but want to get their gender change first. You can get married as female or as male, to make it easier. And that's really what it is. It's not about single sex basis, because that's not what you will get access to from this. And the other problem again is that the Conservative Party and the right-wing media is using this as a smear campaign toward it. You will see the BBC for literally 2 days, 3 days maybe it was, having trans prisoners on their front page as the top story on their website. I looked at the BBC for 2 or 3 days in a row, and it was just transgender prisoners. How's that impartiality? And like, how can you expect to actually discuss this in a proper way when all you just do is publish trans hate online?
I thought it was very irresponsible of the likes of the BBC and other media outlets focusing on this issue in this way. I know many people from the gay community made a comparison with the 1980s, when the media focused on demonized the gay community back in the 1980s, and there was a sort of, it seemed like a repetition of that, and we saw the consequences of that. It's very dangerous behavior. And what I think it's important is that people are informed and not get their information, in such a hateful way, because then they'll act on that. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
The other problem is that the trans community is excluded from this debate from the right-wing media. You have the likes of, I think, India Willoughby. I think that's how you pronounce the last name. I may have got that wrong. She, I think, tried to get on Talk TV to talk about trans issues, and was told there was no more slots available. And you also have the likes of her getting death threats from the National Front, from a terror group. It is literally a terror group under the 2013 Terrorism Act. I think they could categorize as one, where they would threaten to kill her, and also things the likes happened to another person of color as well. And this is the sort of hate that's essentially coming from all of this. In January, I think the Daily Mail published, and Novara Media did some good statistics on this. They found out that the Daily Mail has published about 1,000 negative articles about trans people in January this year.
My God.
And hate crime has gone up by over 1,000% in the UK.
What they wouldn't be able to, like, if they were to do a similar thing about people of color or any other community, they would be condemned for it. But they seem to get away with it because it's against trans people.
And the hate crime, actually, there was a better support for trans people 4 or 5 years ago, and it's gotten down now because of all of this. Or, well, you would at least be able to think that it's gotten down because of all of this blame from the media on trans people, without actually including trans people in debate. You have the Sunday Times, for example, misgendering Brianna G, who was murdered, and the Daily Mail would actually call up a dentist to find out her old name and dead name her. And that's the sort of hostility we have. And let someone just rest in peace and don't go into all of these details. This person was murdered. Don't go into all of these details. There's no reason for that. There's no relevance to this in any capacity. And you're doing it without even consulting the family or anything like that either about it. It's disgusting, what's going on.
Yeah, and I think it's about selling newspapers. It's about sensationalizing, like very, very personal, something very personal for someone. Can I ask you about your experiences as a trans person in the UK? So when did you move to the UK, and maybe you can tell us about your experiences there as well.
I moved to the UK about 4 years ago, and when I first moved to here, the hostility in the media wasn't that bad toward trans people. I think I moved to here around the time when trans people, where it looked like we had a brighter future, where, I mean, wasn't completely bright, because I mean, there was obviously the Daily Mail and all of the other newspapers, there's still some negative stories, but Theresa May was at least a little bit more progressive than Boris Johnson's and the like on trans rights, and at least at the minimum it looked like it would just be stagnant and they wouldn't have anything negative or positive, but instead it's now gotten worse. And when I moved to the UK as well, it was easy for me to find a community as well and stuff like that. It didn't take long. There's a lot of communities in London and also in other big cities. I used to live in London, I don't anymore, but there's a lot of good communities. So, and they're still there and they still exist, but hate crime is going up. More people are experiencing hate crimes nowadays. I see that going around on social media, I hear it from people I know, or from group chats I'm in and so on. So it's quite disturbing how much it actually has worsened since I moved to the UK. It's only 4 years, and I feel like there's been a significant difference in the rhetoric from the media, and this is sort of driving this right-wing force. Like, you will have the likes of Kelly J. Keane, who organized the protest in Newcastle and had someone speak who is directly quoting Mein Kampf and Adolf Hitler, and outside war memorial from First World War, not from the Second World War, but from the First World War, and she would be quoting that. And then later down the line, you will have her organizing a protest in Glasgow, where one of them was a former UKIP member that was denied to be in the party because of being a Holocaust denier. You will have people who were from like the National Family, I can't remember the organization, but you have people from all around the place, from extreme religious group and extreme right-wing groups coming in, people.
Yeah, they seem to present themselves as mainstream or as concerned citizens, but in reality, a lot of these are far right movements or religious movements as well.
I think the person that organized it, Kelly J. Keane, is campaigned for having armed men in the women's toilet to basically police who goes to the toilet. Like, to be honest, I'll tell you this. If you are worried about trans people using the same toilet as you, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you've probably once in your life been in a pub or somewhere else where a trans person was in the same toilet in public area and gone in to use it. And you will probably not know every single person is a trans person. I myself have heard stories and seen people who were misgendered, but this person was cisgender female, as in born female and identifies as a female, whereas the other person beside them was a trans person, was a trans female. So sometimes you will misgender the wrong person as well. So if you were going to try to police that, if you don't have ID with you, how are you going to control if it's actually a female or male coming through? How can you actually...
But it's also this automatic feeling that trans people are trying to do something wrong. Like, instead of actually treating people with respect, there are good people and bad people in every walk of life, but there is this presenting of an idea that automatically trans people are trying to get into bathrooms to do whatever, and this is the wrong way of approaching this. But as you said, yeah, there are cisgender people who can be misgendered because we don't. You look at a cisgender woman who's very boyish could be misgendered. So the approach we have to things to this issue in particular is completely wrong, and the media don't help.
It's predominantly focused around trans women. I will tell you, if you go to pretty much any article from the right-wing media, it will always be about trans women, trans females. It will never be about trans males. It's always about this sort of portrayal as.
Why do you think that's the case? Yeah,
because it's similar. Like I think it's similar to like how gay people were treated back in the 80s and so on. Like you will see a lot more men being treated completely like pedophiles and so on. Whereas if you're a female that's into other females or bisexual female, it's a bit different story. It's easier to portray the men as the enemy of feminism, as the enemy of feminist groups, and that's what they're trying to do. They're essentially trying to put this portrayal up where we're the real feminists here, we're the real people, we believe in women's rights, we believe in protecting women, and if you are trans female trying to come in, you will try to you're attacking our group because you're taking away our rights, or you're trying to do it. No, I'm not trying to take away your rights. I'm just trying to be myself and live. I'm not actually that interested in having articles written about my friends and others every single day in a negative manner. I just want to be left alone, essentially. And that's essentially the problem. We have this portrayal of trans females being men that's trying to essentially take away women's rights. That is what this is about. That's what this group is trying to portray it as. That's why you won't hear about trans men in the media very often. If you do, it's more about, from what I've seen at least, it's more about trans boys who are coming out, and you will hear more about the misportrayal of statistics about the extreme regret rate or something like that. You will hear about those stories more, but you won't hear about trans men. It's significantly more trans females or trans boys when they are
something you brought up there about regret, and I forget, I think it's philosophy. There's a YouTuber on, and I'll leave a link in the description of this video. I forget the name now, but it's a pretty large YouTuber who talks about trans issues, and she's trans herself. But she brought up a very interesting statistic about regret rates, and hip replacements have a higher regret rate than trans operations, for example. So it's, but also she explained how the steps that need to take place for somebody to transition are much more difficult, much more extreme than if somebody wanted to get a hip replacement, for example. Sorry, go on.
I'm glad you're mentioning this, because in Denmark and the UK has similar systems, similar approaches from what I can gather. I am yet to be seen by the UK gender clinic. I was seen by the Danish gender clinic in Denmark, and back then it was run by the sexological clinic. It was run as, it would literally be questionnaires about your sex life to such a detailed and extreme extent. If you were over 18, I was under 18 at that point, but if you're over 18, it would be such an extreme extent of sexual questionnaires that you'd be asked from this place. And that would be the questions, because it was seen as a relation to some sort of sex fantasy. That was how it's portrayed in Denmark, and it's still a little bit to an extent. But when you want to be seen in Denmark, and similar to the UK, you wait maybe a few years or something like that in Denmark. But in Denmark, the waiting list is shorter, but the waiting list for surgery is longer than in the UK. So it will be about a year, maybe 6 months to be seen when I was going through it. In the UK, it's about 5 years. And when you then get into the clinic in Denmark, you will be asked all sort of questions, and I will be putting on this narrative that I'm the most feminine person in the world. I'll be wearing a dress. I'll be having as much makeup as so on. I'm more neutral in my style in general, but that's how I portrayed myself, just to go in and make sure I can get this medication that I want, because I needed to portray myself as feminine as humanly possible, to an extent where I think that's just not who I am, but that's how you have to portray yourself to get this medication. A lot of people go in, and I've heard similar stories in the UK where people go in and try to portray themselves as masculine or as feminine as possible. If you're non-binary and you want hormones, you sometimes advise to not say that you're non-binary, but actually to just be trans female or trans, or say you're trans female or trans male, and then keep it to yourself and keep it out of this group, because you don't want to be seen as someone that's not masculine.
But it's terrible, because it's important that, and I think also psychologically, you want to feel comfortable with yourself, but if you have to convince yourself, no, I need to act in a particular way in order just to get the medication that I need, it's pretty dire. We're getting close to the end of the time, but I just wanted to ask you, in what way do you think things could improve for the trans community? Would it in the UK, because we'll focus on that, would it be better to have more representation, for example, in the media? Maybe MPs, would it be a good idea to have some trans MPs? Or what way do you think things could improve? Or does it need to start with the media, where maybe the problem is most acute?
I think there's multiple ways to fix the problem. I think, first of all, it will get better. It won't get better a lot. I'm not entirely sure under Keir Starmer, but that will improve things for people. Even though he is a bit, he's not very public about it. He doesn't want to say what he's going to do and so on for trans people, and he abstained on the vote. I'm quite angry about that, but I still think he's not going to make people's lives worse. He's not going to fight the election on trans people. I don't think he's going to go to that extreme. So at least there'll be a bit more media silence when he gets in. That's, as a starter, a massive improvement. Having trans MPs in will help. But I think the main thing is the media. And it may change when the Conservatives lose power, when suddenly there's no reason to talk about trans people anymore. I think there will be less of an argument for them to talk about trans people suddenly if Labour's in power, because they know Labour is not going to be so extreme that they're going to take away rights. They will just keep it. They will not improve them, or they will keep it. They may improve them a slight bit, or say, okay, job's done. We've made it from 2 years to live in your gender to 1 year instead. That may be what they will do, if it is. So the media is, for now, at least, the most important thing, but I see it to be different under Keir Starmer, mostly because the media will have less of an interest to talk about trans people, and they will talk more about everything that Keir Starmer is doing wrong and try to scrutinize him on every single thing about Brexit, about rejoining, whatever he's going to do. So I think trans people are going to have less attention in the media then, but I think what we need is, we don't have a strong independent media regulator in the UK, from what I can see. We need a strong and proper independent media regulator that has a set of guidelines that, for example, say something along the lines of you shouldn't be allowed to be misgender people or dead name them, and you should try to not just go with this made up statistics or just misportrayed statistics. I think it all comes down to how we portray things in the media, just in general, not just for trans people. Like, if you are portraying statistics and saying 10,000 people died of COVID last year in the newspaper, when in actuality maybe 100,000 people, or whatever the number would be, like, that's a big jump. We need to have media regulation that essentially can ensure that we don't have this misrepresenting of facts. And okay, I can understand sometimes you accidentally forgot to type in that 0 or stuff like that, but if it happens repeatedly, you will obviously not do that repeatedly that many times, make that many mistakes. In that case, I think the independent media regulators should be able to find them and start an investigation as well, of course.
Yeah,
and
higher quality media is definitely required
in general. Because I think this comes down, I think this is linked to a lot of other issues. It's about misportraying facts and misinformation. So I don't think it's just about that. The only other thing I'll say that could help, and I think Finland is doing a really good job on this, is how in Finland they're teaching kids to try not to be misinformed on social media and stuff like that, trying to teach how to identify fake news and so on. Proper education around that for children will help a lot as well.
Yeah.
And I think that will help misrepresentation being narrowed, and people will be able to call out the bullshit that the media sometimes have, and that would help significantly, I think, as well. So it's education and stricter media regulations. And I'm not talking about taking away freedom of speech for people, or not saying you're allowed to interpret the facts, but you can't completely portray it in your own angle, or like form your own narrative of this statistics. You need to be able to portray the facts, and you can portray it in a negative or in a positive way. That's up to you. That's fine. But don't come and say that because only 100 people died of COVID it's okay. That's such a small number. That's the same as the flu. That's not the case, you know. Like, that's the sort of thing we need. We need proper media regulation that will help.
Very good. Thank you so much. So I want to say thank you so much, Teddy, for coming on and talking to me today. I'll leave a link to your Twitter account, if that's okay, in the description of the video. Maybe we can chat again in another stage to see how things are going in the UK for the trans community and for yourself. Thanks so much for coming on today.
No worries.